Back in the day, when a dollar went farther and a trip to the market was more than just a quick errand, families made do with what little they had. Picture your grandmother, standing over a hot stove, counting every penny to feed 8 hungry mouths. There were no fancy takeout or recipe apps, just simple, hearty meals made with love and resourcefulness. These dishes weren't just food, they were survival, dressed up as comfort. A pinch of flour and water could become pancakes for the whole family, and scraps were turned into nourishing soups. In tough times, families didn't just get by, they thrived through creativity. Today, those meals are slipping away, replaced by convenience. But they hold timeless lessons in making do. Let's rediscover these simple, hearty dishes, where a little ingenuity turned the everyday into something extraordinary. When eggs were a luxury and flour cost more than gold, mothers found a way to feed their families with nothing more than flour, water, and a pinch of salt. These thin, crispy pancakes were cooked quickly on a hot griddle, filling bellies even when the pantry was nearly empty. The trick was in the batter: thin enough to spread, but thick enough to hold together. Some smart cooks added a little baking powder or let the batter sit overnight to make it fluffier. Kids would fight over the crispy edges, and mothers learned to make extra because these pancakes disappeared fast. The best part? They could be eaten plain with a sprinkle of sugar or rolled up with whatever jam was left in the jar. Simple, sweet comfort that made the hard days a little easier. The story of stone soup is a tale of hope and collaboration, but for many families, it became a reality. In the toughest of times, neighbors would gather around a pot, starting with nothing more than a smooth stone and a little water. As the pot simmered, each neighbor would contribute whatever they could spare: an onion, a carrot, some leftover meat. The stone never added flavor, but it gave the soup something special. The sense that they were in this together. The magic wasn't in the stone, but in the generosity it inspired. Each pot was different, depending on what the community could share. Sometimes the soup was thin, other times thick with vegetables. The lesson here? Asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And when times were tough, sharing made everyone's meal better than going hungry alone. During the Great Depression, when yeast was expensive and ovens were scarce, families found a way to bake bread with the simplest of tools. Mothers would wrap dough in wet newspaper and cook it in makeshift ovens, or even bury it in coals. The result was dense, hearty bread that could last for days without going stale. Children thought it was magic watching their mothers pull out warm loaves from the paper. The slow cooking process gave the bread a unique flavor, and families learned to slice it thin to make it last longer. It wasn't about fancy equipment or ingredients, it was about making do, proving that with creativity and determination, even the most basic ingredients could turn into something to hold a family together. When the garden was full of green tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before the frost, families didn't let them go to waste. Thick slices of unripe tomatoes were coated in cornmeal and fried up in whatever fat was available, be it lard, bacon grease, or even butter if times were good. The result? A crispy, tart treat that could be a side dish, a main course, or even breakfast when served with eggs. What made this dish even more special was that green tomatoes were packed with nutrients, often more so than ripe ones, helping families stay healthy through the winter. And the best part? If you had a garden, these tomatoes were practically free. What started as a way to save food became a beloved meal, and one that stretched the food budget far longer than expected. A single can of salmon could feed a family of 6 when mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and onions, then fried into golden patties. These crispy, flaky treats were a lifesaver when fresh meat was scarce. The trick was stretching that small can of salmon as far as possible without sacrificing flavor. Clever cooks would save stale bread to make their own breadcrumbs, and some even added mashed potatoes to make the patties more filling. Served for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, these salmon patties were a hit with children who normally avoided fish. Leftovers were even better the next day, either sliced cold for sandwiches or reheated in a skillet. A nutritious, economical meal that became a household favorite and a reminder that a little can go a long way. When rationing meant no eggs, no milk, and no butter, bakers found a way to create a cake using nothing more than vinegar, oil, and a bit of creativity. This moist, chocolatey cake became a symbol of how resourcefulness could bring a little sweetness into hard times, The secret to its success lay in the chemical reaction between vinegar and baking soda, which gave the cake its rise and light texture, just like eggs would. Despite the simple ingredients, the cake was rich in flavor and surprisingly durable. It could last for days without drying out. Children loved helping mix it, as there were no delicate egg whites to fold or butter to cream. With a light powdered sugar glaze, it felt special, proving that even in the toughest times, you could create joy with what you had. 2 pounds of potatoes and a single onion could feed an entire family thanks to the magic of a cast iron skillet. The potatoes, sliced thin, would crisp up on the outside while staying fluffy inside, while the onions caramelized to perfection. It wasn't a complicated dish, but it was filling, satisfying. It could stick to your ribs for hours. Families would add whatever vegetables they had: carrots, peppers, or green beans, turning this simple skillet into a complete meal. Kids loved fighting over the crispy potato edges, and if there were any leftovers, they were even better the next day, reheated for breakfast with an egg if the family was lucky enough to have chickens. A meal that was cheap, filling, and always hearty, no matter how tight the budget. Stale bread wasn't something to throw away. It was the foundation for a dessert that could feed the whole family. With a little milk, eggs, and whatever sweetener was available, stale bread was transformed into a warm, comforting pudding. The bread soaked up the custard mixture, becoming part cake, part pudding, and entirely delicious. Families learned to save the crusts and heels of bread, knowing they would soon become a treat. The pudding could be flavored with vanilla, cinnamon, or even a bit of lemon zest. Some cooks added raisins or nuts when they had them, but the basic recipe was perfect on its own. Whether served warm in winter or cold in summer, it was a dessert. That brought joy to the table, turning something once considered waste into a beloved treat. A single ham bone could flavor a pot of rice and beans that would feed the family for 3 days. The ham bones simmered all day. The rice stretched the meal to feed more mouths. This simple, hearty dish became a go-to for families looking to make a little meat go a long way. The beauty of rice and beans was in its simplicity. Some days the beans were creamy and thick, other times more soup-like, depending on what vegetables were added. The ham bone could be reused in multiple pots, each time offering a little less meat but just as much flavor. This meal wasn't just filling, it was a complete protein, a reminder of how resourcefulness could turn limited ingredients into something nourishing. When fresh meat was too expensive, but the garden was overflowing with tomatoes, families got creative with what they had. Savory gravy made from canned tomatoes, flour, and bacon drippings became the perfect topping for freshly baked biscuits. The acidity of the tomatoes balanced out the richness of the bacon fat, creating a satisfying meal that was both hearty and flavorful. The trick to making this dish was cooking the flour in the bacon grease until it was golden, before adding the tomatoes to avoid the raw flour taste. Some cooks would add a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, while others preferred the tomatoes' natural temps. Each time it was made, the gravy would taste a little different, depending on the tomatoes. But it was always a hit, quick, easy, and comforting. When meat was scarce, a simple roll of bologna could feed an entire family. Sliced thick and fried alongside potatoes, this dish was a quick and satisfying meal. The bologna crisped up on the edges while the potatoes absorbed the flavorful drippings, making for a hearty one-pan meal that was both filling and affordable. Families would add onions to the pan if they had them, or keep it simple with just the bologna and potatoes. Kids, who often turned their noses up at other meats, loved this dish, making it a reliable go-to when the budget was tight. Leftovers were even better the next day, sliced cold for sandwiches or reheated with eggs for breakfast. A humble meal that made the most of inexpensive ingredients. Oatmeal sweetened with molasses wasn't just a filling breakfast, it was a powerhouse of nutrition. The molasses added not only sweetness but also essential minerals like iron and calcium, which growing children needed. Families fueled through long, hard days of work, providing both quick and sustained energy. The key to making this oatmeal perfect was cooking it low and slow, stirring frequently to prevent burning and create a creamy texture. Some families added a pinch of salt, while others mixed in whatever fruit was on hand. The warmth and substance of this meal helped start the day right, giving everyone the energy they needed to face the day ahead. When there was no butter, no jam, and no meat, children found comfort in sandwiches made with lard and sugar. The lard spread just thick enough to hold the sugar, provided the necessary fats, while the sugar gave a quick burst of energy. It wasn't gourmet, but it was a simple treat that satisfied hunger and sweet cravings alike. This wasn't just desperation. It was comfort food. With a slice of white bread, a little lard, and a sprinkle of sugar, families could get by. Sometimes, if there was access to brown sugar, the sandwiches took on a molasses flavor, making them feel just a bit more special. A humble reminder that even the simplest meals can bring comfort in tough times. When the chicken was gone but the broth remained, clever cooks would turn that leftover liquid into a hearty meal by adding dumplings. Made from just flour, eggs, and water. These soft dumplings absorbed the flavor of the broth, turning a thin soup into something much more satisfying. The trick was getting the dumpling dough. It's just right firm enough to hold together but soft, enough to cook through quickly. Some cooks would roll the dough thin and cut it into strips, while others would simply drop spoonfuls into the simmering broth. This dish made the most of leftovers, turning a simple broth into a complete meal. And the dumplings were always the favorite, soft and comforting with each bite. When the apple barrel was getting low and the onion bin was full, resourceful cooks combined these unlikely partners into a side dish that could complement nearly any meal. The sweetness of the apples balanced out the sharpness of the onions, creating a complex flavor that added depth to simple meat dishes, slow cooked so the onions caramelized and the apples held their shape. This dish became a fall favorite. It was often served with pork, chicken, or even enjoyed on its own with cornbread. The natural sugars in the apples provided quick energy, while the onions added vitamins and minerals. Even children who might usually avoid vegetables couldn't resist this sweet and savory combination. When the pantry was near empty, and there was nothing left but crackers and milk, families turned these simple ingredients into a surprisingly filling meal. Crumbled saltines, dropped into warm milk, created a soft porridge-like soup that filled empty stomachs when nothing else was available. This soup was often the last meal before payday. It's comforting and easy to make. Some families added a pinch of salt and pepper, while others preferred it plain. Gentle enough for sick children, but satisfying for healthy ones too. This humble dish provided the calories and comfort needed to get through until the next grocery run. A simple hug in a bowl during difficult times. Dried pinto beans and cornbread were the backbone of many meals during hard times. By simmering the beans with onions and whatever small bits of meat or fat could be spared, families created a hearty base. Then cornbread batter was added on top, and the dish baked until golden. The result was a filling, one-pot meal that could feed the whole family for just a few dollars. This casserole was adaptable, some added bacon or ham for extra flavor, while others kept it simple with just onions and seasonings, as the beans provided. Protein and the cornbread added the carbohydrates needed to keep everyone full and satisfied. Even better the next day. It was a reminder that great meals didn't have to be complicated or expensive to nourish and bring people together. During the Great Depression, home bakers discovered an unexpected ingredient for a rich, moist cake: canned tomato soup. This unusual pairing worked because the soup provided the moisture and sugar needed for the batter, while spices like cinnamon and cloves added warmth and depth of flavor. The result was a cake that could be made with pantry staples, but tasted far more decadent than the ingredients suggested. Despite its name, the cake didn't taste like tomatoes at all. Instead, it had a tender crumb and rich flavor, with a slight temps that came from the tomatoes. It was a clever way to use what was on hand to create a dessert that lasted for days without drying out. A cake made from what you had, but still special enough to serve guests or enjoy on any day. When ground beef was scarce or expensive, many families turned to oats to stretch a small amount of meat into a hearty, satisfying meal. By mixing ground beef with rolled oats, eggs, and seasonings, they created a meatloaf that was both tender and filling. The oats absorbed the flavors and juices, making every bite taste meaty without needing as much beef. This dish allowed families to feed a crowd with just 1 pound of meat. It became so popular that some preferred it over traditional meatloaf. As the oats kept it moist and tender, paired with mashed potatoes or vegetables, this meal became a staple in many homes, proving that creativity in the kitchen could make a little go a long way. In Appalachian kitchens, where breakfast often consisted of little more than biscuits, resourceful cooks turned a simple cocoa-based sauce into a sweet breakfast treat. chocolate gravy made from cocoa powder, flour, sugar, and milk created a thick pudding-like consistency that could be poured over biscuits, toast, or even eaten by the spoonful. This dish was as simple as it was comforting. The cocoa provided rich flavor, while the flour thickened the mixture into something substantial enough to be filling. On Sunday mornings, large batches were made, turning an otherwise plain breakfast into a sweet, satisfying start to the day. Children loved it, never knowing they were eating a dish born from necessity and creativity. A true example of resourcefulness, pickle soup began with the leftover brine from dill pickle jars. During tough times, when every bit of food counted, families would transform this tangy brine into a hearty, satisfying soup. They added potatoes, onions, and whatever scraps of meat they had, turning what could have been discarded into a meal that could feed a family. The soup had a distinctive, tart flavor from the pickle brine, which some loved, while others had to learn to tolerate. A little sour cream added richness when it was available. What made this dish truly special was its ability to turn waste into sustenance, proving that good food could come from the most unexpected sources. When meat was scarce and expensive, Southern families turned to butter beans as a primary protein source. This hearty casserole combined soaked butter beans with onions, seasonings, and whatever small amount of meat or fat could be spared, creating a filling dish that could feed a large family without breaking the bank. The long cooking process allowed the beans to absorb all the flavors, while any small pieces of bacon or salt pork added richness. Layered with breadcrumbs or cornbread crumbs, the casserole baked to a golden, crispy top. It was a meal that proved that you didn't need meat-o. Create something satisfying, just patience and a little ingenuity. When fresh meat was out of reach, families learned to extract the maximum nutrition from bones that butchers often gave away for free. Beef, pork, or chicken bones simmered for hours, releasing collagen, minerals, and any remaining bits of meat into the water. This rich, gelatinous broth became the base for soups, stews, and gravies, providing nourishment for days. Families would add whatever vegetables they had: onions, carrots, potatoes, creating hearty, filling meals that cost almost nothing. The broth was nutrient-dense and satisfying, turning humble scraps into something vital. Many kept a perpetual pot simmering, adding new bones and vegetables as they became available, ensuring that no scrap of food went to waste. When times were tough and paychecks were small, mothers across America knew they could make a little ground beef go a long way. By browning a pound of beef and turning it into a rich gravy with flour and milk, they could serve a hearty, filling meal over a mountain of mashed potatoes, enough to feed a family of 6. The magic was in the patience. Slowly stirring the milk into the roux created a smooth, creamy gravy that coated every spoonful. This dish wasn't fancy, but it was comforting, with the beef providing the flavor and the potatoes adding bulk. It was the kind of meal that brought families together, offering warmth and sustenance even when money was tight. Combining canned tuna, egg noodles, and a can of cream of mushroom soup, this casserole became the backbone of many American kitchens in the post-war years. The dish, born from the Great Depression's make do with what you have mentality, became a favorite because it was simple, affordable, and easily stretched to feed a large family. Some families added a crunchy topping of crushed potato chips for extra texture, while others stuck with a breadcrumb topping. It was a quick, satisfying meal that didn't require fancy ingredients or elaborate prep. This casserole proved that comfort food didn't need to be expensive to feel like a special treat, and that a little creativity could transform humble ingredients into something delicious. These forgotten meals are more than just recipes. Reflect the creativity and resilience of families during tough times. Each dish, made from simple ingredients or leftovers, tells a story of making do and finding comfort in what you have. In today's fast-paced world, these meals remind us to appreciate the little things and use our resources wisely. With a little creativity and love, you can still make something special, no matter what's in your pantry. If you enjoyed these recipes, be sure to subscribe for more stories and meals from simpler times.